Welcome everyone to this another CrossLink webinar. Today we're going to be going through a tax return in our CrossLink Desktop 1040 software. And specifically what we're going to be doing today or covering today is, let me get through here, is, well, an introduction to CrossLink 1040. We'll open it up, see how it works, see how you could use the software as for tax preparation mostly, kind of like focusing on using the software to keep track of returns and process those returns. We'll take a look at how you can prepare returns in the software, the different types of methodologies we use. And finally, I have verify and transmit there. We're just going to wrap up the tax return, see how we can go through the process of completing that return all the way to verification and transmission of that tax return, or e-filing, in other words. So with that said, all the stuff that we're going to be doing here today is going to be in the software live. So let's jump right over into our new CrossLink 2023 software. This is available right now. You can download it on our website. And we're on the home page. In other words, the work in progress summary. As soon as you launch the software and go through first time setup, set up your password and all that basic setup, you land here, the work in progress summary. And what this page is all about is giving you a summary as to what's going on in your business, all the work in progress that you want to keep track of. So let's take a look at some of the different sections that we have here on this home page, because this work in progress summary is going to give you some good information as to, the tax returns that you're processing. First of all, you can see how many returns you currently have in your system. In my case, I just have the one. But as you prepare returns, you'll see them build here on this list. And if you're a returning customer, one thing to realize is that, all your customers that you have in the prior year, they're set to transfer forward. But those returns transfer forward as soon as you click on Add New and enter in a social that exists in the prior year. If you'd like, we can bring over all those returns that you currently have in last year and bring them kind of like in one go to the new software. But by default, we find that most people prefer to bring them in one at a time as you use the software. Let me go back to the work in progress. I was looking at this lookup screen here, but I'll show you how to get there. To go back into the work in progress, if you ever get lost and you need to return to that main page, we have this WIP button that stands for work in progress, which takes you back. And where I was at just a few moments ago was the lookup screen. This is essentially where you want to go to find the customers that are currently in your system. You could also click on Select a Return here. It's essentially the same thing. It takes you to this area, which has this Go button, kind of like a way to quickly see where you're at or identify what you're looking at. By default, it wants to search by customers by last name or SSN. As you can see here on the very top right, you can change this as well. If you want to change and search for a different type of method, look at all the different types of, search criteria we have here. So very easy to find the customer that you're looking for, but last name or SSN is typically the most commonly used one. And then I have one customer, but when I go to the lookup screen, it's all blank at the moment. That's because you have to search for the customer, or you can click on Go. Just click on the Go button without entering in any information, and it'll show up it'll list all your customers. If you had more than one, they'd all appear listed here. By the way, these columns, you can move these around however you see fit. And if you scroll to the right using the scroll bar, there's a whole bunch of different other pieces of information here that may be useful to you. When the return was last printed, last modified, who's the creator, the cell phone of the taxpayer, some details about advance returns, pre-acknowledgement statuses. So a lot of things are hidden at first sight, but you can grab them if you'd like them and move them over to this main page just by dragging and dropping the columns. Very easy. So returning to this work in progress, this WIP, that's select a return. Some other things in this tax return area that you may be interested in is this status summary list, just to give you a breakdown of the returns that you have by status. In my case, I don't have much since I just have the one return. But if I had more, I can see all my returns, what status they're currently in, and I could also double click on any one of these to see that tax return or group of tax returns by status. And another one, training returns. Here on the tax returns area, this is all about creating a list of tax returns for training purposes, separate from your real tax returns. So I can create a return here. Let me just create something real quick. There's a test tax return, so I can, play around in the software. I'll close this return. So here I have this no name tax return that I was just playing around with. And if I go back to my work in progress, so here's my real customer. And then here's my training customers. So two separate collections of tax returns, basically, your real returns and your training returns. And then finally, TaxPass. If you're using taxpassapp.com this upcoming season to retrieve information about, retrieve information mobily from TaxPass, you can use this option to import, to retrieve those returns that you're pulling in from TaxPass. If you want some details about that, we have a past webinar that covers all of that, which is currently available for your viewing. So those are, I think, the most important areas in tax returns. We're going to go down here to the printing queue. This can be useful, especially if you're using some of the banks that can print checks, bank product checks, through our software, namely TPG and Republic. Those are the two banks that you can configure to print banking products through our software. The rest, the other banks, they're handled through their website, through their online portal. But if you're using Republic or TPG, you're most likely configured to print the checks through the software. That's the default. And if that's the case, they're going to pop in right here, checks, registers, and activation. Once you receive your check stock from the bank, you can also come in here and activate that check stock. Essentially, just enter in. You can click on check inventory, activate, and it'll ask you for the first check number, the last check number, so the software can keep track of all of your checks. So some things to do, if you're using those banks, you can configure the software already for that. You also have some other options in here when it comes to printing, especially when you're using the queue system to print, in the sense that you're not printing documents immediately, you're queuing them so that you can print them later on. I would say that type of configuration is very rare. So in most cases, I think you'll be sticking to checks, registers, and activation if you're using one of the banks. The other options, they're only really used if you're sending information to print here. But most users, most CrossLink customers, they're just printing stuff right away when you need it. Now, another important area, this area down here on the bottom left called Other Items. This area is more administrative, kind of taking care of some things when you're using the software. And most importantly, especially with the new software, is this software updates. This is going to help you keep track of any updates that you have pending to be installed in the software. And these updates, they come in when you transmit with the software. Every time you transmit with the program, it's looking to see if there's any updates that need to be applied, and it'll download those updates automatically. You just have to install them, apply the updates, essentially. I can see in my software right now, I'm at version 2023.002. So I have a couple of updates applied, but not that many. I still have one more. But before I apply this update, I'll show you how that works. Let me transmit one more time. I'm going to transmit to Central Site using this option here, transmit, or I can also go to my toolbar. Same thing. It opens up this little transmission window. And then from here, if I had any returns waiting to be e-filed, or queued is the word we use, any returns queued to go, you can click on Filter, see those returns in question, the whole list of all the tax returns that you have queued up. They don't appear here at the top. When you're looking at this transmission window, you'll see how many returns you have waiting to be transmitted. And then once you click on this transmit button down here on the bottom right, that's when the transmission happens. Any returns that you have waiting to be transmitted would be sent off at this point. And in addition to that, any updates that you need for the software will be downloaded at this point. Functionality that you may want to have in your program, like the ability to print checks, the ability to offer bank products, those all come in as transmissions, as kind of like updates into the software. So definitely a good idea, as you use the program, probably like every day, whenever you're starting to use the software, go ahead and do a blank transmission, transmit with the software, and see if you have any updates waiting to be installed. If you do, you can click on those that software updates option. It'll show you those updates that you have pending, and then you can just apply all. Oh, looks like there's a printing update just now. Applying the updates, it does it by itself. All you would have to do is click on restart. It's just going to restart the software for us. So bear with me as it kind of reloads here. Don't want to spend or waste too much of your time, but I really wanted to show this update process because, it is the season right now to be updating the program and making sure that you have all the functionality that you want to have to prepare returns. And now we're good. As you can see, when I return back to the work in progress, software updates, we're all clear. We're ready to use the software fully. Now, in addition to software updates, which is pretty important, you also have some other options in here. The ability to see messages from CrossLink, whether it's emails from technical support, bulletins regarding IRS updates. You can keep track about that stuff. Today's appointments is like this built-in calendar tool. If you want to keep track of customer appointments, you can use this tool for that if you'd like. The ability to back up tax returns is here as well. This is something that can be turned off or on, this ability to see the backup returns option. So if you don't see it in your software, it's just a setting that you have to turn on, and vice versa. You also have TextLink Plus Inbound. This is if you're using the texting option when you're sending text messaging through or text messages through the software. You have the ability to also, if the customer replies back, if they replies back to your text message, you would see those messages, those inbound messages here. Another way to, keep track of your customer's communication. And related to that is TaxPass messaging or messages. If you are using the taxpassapp.com address to send messages with your customers, they would show up here. Okay. So that's one half of the work in progress summary. All these options over here are at least the important ones that you'll be using, for tax preparation mostly. Over here to the right, we have transmit queue. We saw that one already, all about opening up that transmission window to transmit with the software. We also have recover from archive. That's an additional service that not that many people use to kind of like this online backup storage. Wouldn't necessarily worry about that as much. Now, exceptions and rejects, this one is going to be pretty important. At least it can be when it comes to your tax returns. Because in this area, you can keep track of all the returns that have either been rejected by the IRS, by the states, or refused by our central site. And I'll explain the difference between those two here shortly. And then you also have some other tools when it comes to like seeing what's going on with returns when you're using the ability to capture remote signatures, capturing that taxpayer signature remotely. You can see how that's going here under pending remote signatures. Same idea with completed remote signatures. If they've completed their signature, those returns would pop up here. But returning to Fed rejects and Fed refused, these are the ones I would say you're probably going to keep track of most often. Same thing with state refused and rejects. It's all about like when you e-file a return, once you transmit a return, if that return is stopped or rejected, for some reason, it's not going to be acknowledged. It's not going to be accepted due to some error, due to some issue with the return. If that's the case, if those returns are rejected, they would show up here, they would pop in, and you would be able to click on this to see what's going on with the return. You can open up that tax return and it will show you the message as to why the return was rejected. When it comes to IRS rejects, they would show up here under Fed rejects, state refused and rejects, naturally your state tax return. And then Fed refused, this one can sometimes be a little bit confusing. It's basically CrossLink stop the tax return. You try to e-file the return, it comes to CrossLink, and then from us we send it on to the IRS normally. But for some reason, this return stopped at our side, at our CrossLink central site, and then we refused the transmission onto the IRS. If that's the case, the most common reason that could occur is if you try to, let's say, e-file the same return twice, that second transmission would be refused because we already got this return. It's already been accepted, let's say. So one of the reasons why, but if you're ever in doubt as to why a return was rejected or refused, just open the return. It'll show up right away, typically. It pops up with the rejection or the refusal. But I'll also show you where you can see it. When you're in the return, there's an area where you can see those rejects if you want to manually see them. So exceptions and rejects, as you prepare returns this season, definitely keep an eye out for that because, as we know, if a return is rejected, it's pretty much stopped at that point. It's requesting action from you to either fix the error and retransmit so that, the customer can get their refund as quickly as possible. You want to make sure that that return is acknowledged or accepted. And then finally, quick reports. Here on the bottom right, this is all about creating a list of different reports that you can run very quickly with a click, essentially. I can click on any of these options. I may not have anything. Let me see here. There you go. Well, I got this one. My one customer falls into this category of information, this report that I'm running. But this is all about, being able to run or to see a list of results very quickly, reports that you'll be running often at your office. By default, this quick reports area is all blank. You'll notice that when you install the program brand new, there's nothing in here. You have to build the list yourself, add the reports that you want to see as part of this list. And to do that, you want to go to the utility menu and then quick report list. This is where you can modify. The software comes pre-built with all these reports that you can run. And if you want to be able to run them quickly or just from this work in progress summary, that's what this is about. Just adding, click on whatever you want. It'll add itself to this area, and then you can click on it to see the option. Sorry, let me go back here. I wanted to show you this one, this text messaging one. This is built in as well for customers that are looking to send mass text messages to all of their customers at the same time, or the majority, the customers that have, the cell phone information saved into the return. You can send a mass text message, as they say, by using this tool right here. All you have to do is add it to your quick reports and then run it. And then you'll have the ability to send text at the very top. I just have the one customer again, but if I had more than one, I can click on send text and it'll send that message to all your customers at the same time. So just know we have these tools built in. If you need some help setting them up, you can certainly let us know and we'll guide you through it. But we do have those tools available, and it should be pretty straightforward. So that's our work in progress summary. All the options that we have here on this main page to keep track of what's going on with your tax returns. Now let's actually take a look at the tax return itself, being able to process a return in our software. And to do that, I'm going to click on Add New. I'm going to enter in a social here. Let's just use any number that comes to mind. And there we go. Normally, when you start the return, it takes you to this client data screen. This is where you capture in all the basic taxpayer, spouse information. We'll start entering in some information there shortly. But before we do that, I wanted to show you some of the buttons that we have up top here. These are all the buttons that you can use to, do certain things in the software when it comes to, for example, printing the return, verifying the return for errors, queuing the return, getting it ready to be e-filed. All these kind of quick actions that you want to be able to do, you'll find them typically on the toolbar here. And then over here to the left, we have this attached forms area. This is where you can see all the forms that are currently attached to the return, especially this bottom section, showing me my federal and all the federal returns, all the federal forms currently attached to this one return. By default, you'll probably see the 1040 and the 8879 pop in. Those kind of forms just pop in automatically all the time. These other ones, Schedule 1, 2, and 3, I've added that as part of my setup. You can go into Setup, Office Setup, and there's an option in there to auto add the schedules 1, 2, and 3. So if that sounds like something that you want to do, you can do that as well. Now, in addition to like the federal forms, right, we also have these tools up top here. These are like just general forms or tools to help you complete the return. So whether it's the invoice when it comes to, I'm sorry, one of the things you'll notice, by the way, is that in order to leave this client data, you have to fill out the filing status. What's the filing status of this return? So just to be able to move around, I'm going to enter in a filing status of Mary filing jointly. And now I can go to my invoice. There you go. And this is all about, your tax preparation fees, what you want to charge for tax prep. There's, other options in here, whether it's the document archive, that repository of electronic documents, PDFs, images, all that is stored here. And then remote signature, this is all about keeping track of those remote signature requests if you're using that. We have a depreciation area. So if you're talking about entering assets for for items that you're depreciating for this taxpayer, we have this area specifically designed for that. Take a look at that a little bit later on. But, as you can see, a lot of tools over here to the left. But we're going to start off with this client data. That's one of the options over here, the top one. And this is where we can go to start adding in information for this return. So I'll start it. We already have the social in here. It's asking me for the DOB or date of birth. I'll enter in something in here. Name, first name, last name, occupation. Now, one thing I do want to mention, there are some fields as you enter in information in this client data screen and other areas in the software. You may encounter like some fields that don't really have a description next to them. Like these ones over here, right? You have these little boxes over here, but at first glance, you may not know what exactly you're supposed to be typing in there. But if you look down below, the program will tell you. So if you're new to CrossLink, I definitely recommend keeping an eye out on this bottom section. This area is going to give you a description of wherever you're at, of whatever field you click on. It's going to give you a description of what type of information it's expecting. Perhaps they may even give you, like, if we go to the filing status, it's telling you what type of information or entry you're supposed to be typing in that field. So 1 for single, 2 for married filing jointly. You see that? So very useful if you're new, if you don't know exactly what you want to be typing in, keep an eye out for that. And speaking of useful, if you want some additional functionality available to you, like the ability to send text messages or the ability to use remote sign, then in that case, you do want to capture the taxpayer's cell phone. Text messaging, remote sign, they're all based, or they all use the cell phone. Same thing with email. If you want to be able to use some of the functionality that's associated with sending emails through the software, you want to make sure to capture that information for the taxpayer. Another option that's important when it comes to texting, at least, is this little box here. This little box that says text message. We want to select that box if the taxpayer is okay with receiving text messages from your office. And you'll also get this little box here just to confirm that, yeah, they're okay with any of the basic standard text messaging rates that may apply. Kind of like that small print associated with that. And then finally, the cell phone carrier. This one is all about capturing the cell phone carrier. Useful if you're using remote sign, especially. You do want to capture that information. For the text messaging, I found that the cell phone carrier, sometimes it works without it, with just the cell phone and this little X. But just to be on the safe side, especially if you want to use the remote sign functionality in the future, potentially, it's good to capture that cell phone carrier if the customer's, willing to give it to you. IP PIN, this may be useful for those customers that have a identity protection PIN. If they're supposed to be using an identity protection PIN offered by the IRS to the customer, this is where you type it in. You'll find similar fields for the spouse and also even for the dependents. Dependents can have an IP PIN too sometimes. Driver's license, it'd be useful If you're trying to, process the tax return as quickly as possible, the IRS likes to see the driver's license there to confirm. Oh, not the issue date. Let me fix that. Issue date, let's say 2020, expires date 2025. And then a little box to the right over here, similar, right? What does this mean? If you look down below, D for driver's license, S for state, and so on. So driver's license for that. In my case, I'm gonna make this a head of household actually, so we can skip all the spouse information. As a matter of fact, the program did that automatically. As soon as I put in a number 4 here of head of household, and I press tab, it skips all that because it doesn't apply, and we can go straight to the address information for the taxpayer. So let's enter something in here. There's the address. We also have some other information when it comes to the taxpayer, whether or not they were involved in some sort of military conflict. You can capture that information here. If they're trying to do a direct deposit or a direct debit, here's where you can enter in your banking account information. And one thing I should mention about this field and some other fields available throughout the software is that if you click on a field and you see this choices button show up here on the very bottom, this is all about a list of options that applies to that to that field that you're currently on. So right now I'm in this banking or bank account field. What that means is I have all these bank accounts or bank routing numbers that I can choose from. If I have a returning customer and I know they're Citizens National Bank, that's one of the local banks that I see all the time, I can just select it from the list. I could also begin to type in. The program's going to want to autofill for me. So once you have a bank in the system, for every new bank you enter into the program, it's going to be saving it behind the scenes to this database that we have, along with its routing number. Okay, so just to help you fill out and process the return faster. We do have to enter in the bank account number. That one it cannot save. And what type of account it is, whether it's checkings, savings, etc. Here we have client referral. This is typically an optional field, but if you want to track how the customer heard of your business, you can track that information. Here are some options that I built in. So if it was friends or family that brought them in, and I can even type in who exactly, Uncle John, he brought this person over to my business. So now I can keep track of this information. I can run one of those reports that I was talking about before and kind of get a breakdown. How many returns came in due to, this reason, due to a Facebook, due to my flyer, due to whatever. This whole list that I'm building here, I can keep track of those numbers and see what's actually working. But again, that is optional. You can, if you wanted to, you can build this list of options that apply. If you go to the choices in your software, you may notice that there are no options in here. My list is my list that I built into the software. If you ever want to do that yourself, you could always go into the database menu, all the way in the top left. This database menu is all about the it's all about the information that's being populated into the returns automatically. That's what this database is all about. So whether it's your paid preparer information that's populating in the return, the EFIN information that's populating in the return, the occupations, bank routing numbers, that's the one I'm talking about, or that's the one we saw. Referrals, that's the one I'm talking about. So whenever you see a choices button, there's most likely going to be a database associated with it. And if you want to manually modify those options, those choices that you see in there, you can go into the database and do that. But a lot of these databases, by the way, such as the bank accounting one, your EINs, your educational institutions, those will accumulate as you use the software. Every time you add a new one, it's adding it into the system. Well, moving on, we're still kind of working our way down the client data. We have this marketplace question, whether or not the taxpayer purchased their health insurance through the marketplace, through the Obamacare, in other words. If that's the case, if they did purchase their insurance through that marketplace, that's when you'd want to come in here and select this option. If they purchased their health insurance through the marketplace, they have the 1095A that they received, right? So that's what you'd want to use to help you complete this area. Now, this only applies, if they purchased their health insurance through the marketplace. If they did not, if they have their health insurance through their employer, through private health insurance, through all those other options. I know before in years past we had to report that, but now it's only used if they are using the marketplace. And then finally, dependents. How many dependents they have? Let's take a look. Let's just enter in, I don't know, first as well. Child born in 21. That's 1 year old. Let's enter invalid social. The program will know if you're trying to enter in a social that really shouldn't exist. Here, I can start typing in the relationship, whether they're a son, daughter, but this is another area where you can see choices if you'd like. I'll just say that they're a son. Here's another field where at first glance you may not know what exactly it's asking for, but number of months of the dependent live with the taxpayer. Okay, so 12 months. You could also enter in CN for Canada, MX for Mexico if they were living in those areas for the year. And then as soon as I entered some information in there, now the program is already assuming a few things about this dependent based off the age, the relationship. It's already telling me that they're eligible for EIC. That's what this little E means. But you can modify this if you need to. If they're a student or that they're disabled or some other type of category, you can manually just type over this. The program is just trying to help you fill this out faster or kind of give you a clue as to what's going on. And then C, what does this mean? Eligible for child tax credit. Okay, that's again based off of the information I've entered so far. And then I also have this little box. This is just to quickly add a 2441 if the dependent has child care. Since you're adding their information, this might be a good time to ask whether or not the dependent had any child care. If they did, you can mark it with an X, and it'll add that form automatically, or it'll add it soon. We'll see that here. And then lastly, state use, very rarely used. But this is all about, entering in certain state codes or ID if there's like credits that apply to those states. If you're not in those states, then this would not apply to you. But that is typically step one when you're working with a return. You're filling out the client data, entering all the basic taxpayer, spouse, all the information that is then going to populate into all the forms that we add into this tax return, right? And one thing I want to mention, I've entered some information in here, the dependent, all that. And then look what happens when I click on the refresh button. I'm going to click on this refresh button up top here. And notice what happens over here to the left once I click on refresh. See how some of the forms changed? We have a 2441 that was added since I clicked on refresh. That's because I have this little X here. This is, again, just a shortcut to add that form. If I get rid of that next to the dependent and I click on refresh again, the 2441 is gone. So keep that in mind if that's useful to you. The 8867, this added itself automatically. I did not add this form. It just popped in because we have this dependent in here. And I should mention as well that the refresh button, this is like to do a manual refresh, like to do it right away while I'm looking at the screen. However, whenever you go to a different form, whenever you add a form manually, the program is constantly refreshing at that point. So it will show you information as you navigate through the software. But I just wanted to show you how you can kind of see see forms popping in as you enter information in the return. But normally, if you're talking about adding a form, that's all going to be handled here under the Add Form button. This is what you can click on to see all the forms that you can possibly add to the return. They're all organized, I would say, mostly by like importance or commonly used up top. That's why the W2 is up top here. But then after that, they kind of get into like alphabetical, numerical order to help you to find it, right, as you're scrolling down. You could also just go straight to this little search bar here and type in, if you're looking for a 1099 as an example. It'll show you those 1099s. All right. Another way to search for forms is this index tab. This is like the same exact list. We're looking at the federal forms, but they're just described, or excuse me, they're just organized by the description instead of the form name or form number. So this is good if you're trying to search for like the name of the form. As an example, if I start typing in social, it shows me the SSA 1099. Or if I start typing in education, let's say, educational credits. So it's trying to help you find that form. And returning back to this one, if I wanted to add a form, just double click. W2, right? If we're trying to add a W2, very commonly added form. Once you click on add form, it wants to take you to the W2 because it's so common. And then here it is. Here's the W2. Typically, we try to match what the paper form looks like, so you can to help you just fill out the information. You're looking at the W2. Here's the W2 on screen. Match fields, field to field. That's what you're wanting to do. And then in the case of the employer identification number, this is another one where you have choices. You have the ability to choose an EIN that was entered previously. If you have like lots of customers that work in the same industry or the same company, you can choose them. Of course, any new one that you add, it'll save that number and the address information. And then all you have to do is focus on this side, the right side of the W2, how much wages, how much withholding. Of course, you want to fill this out with as much information that appears on the W2, whether it's retirement, other types of codes that may apply, ways of classifying, the state return information. If in my case, I live in Washington State, we don't have any state income tax, but if you did, you just add that state here, and the employer, all that would just populate where it needs to go in the state return, I mean. And then now that I have some income in here, we'll see some other changes. This time I won't click on refresh. I'll just go to the 1040 and notice it kind of refreshed on its own. Now I get to see a refund amount. I get to see other forms that popped in, like the 8812, the W2 that was added when I added that form. But the program is just helping you fill out the information, add the forms that the program knows that you're going to have to add. Even though you're managing forms manually by selecting what forms you want to attach, the program is also going to help you add the forms that it knows you're going to need anyway. And then once you're done adding all the forms that you need to add, right, it really depends on the customer. If you're talking about your basic customer that just has a single job, like in my case, I just have the one W2, really. Then in that case, you're pretty good. But that depends on the taxpayer, right? What situation applies to them, but you add the forms as you need them. Now, I do want to mention if you have a refund amount, or if the taxpayer has a refund amount, I should say, the 8879, this is going to be important when it comes to selecting how the taxpayer is going to get their refund. Whether it's going to be a check from the IRS, that's option 1 here. Whether it's direct deposit from the IRS, that's option 2. And then probably the most commonly used one is option 5. That's bank products. Whether or not the taxpayer is going to be getting or using a bank product for their refund and paying your tax preparation fees using that refund. That's when you'd want to choose option 5 here. And then once you do, and I'm sorry I can't demonstrate this because I don't have bank approval, but once you add option 5 here, another form is going to pop in automatically. For this one, you don't even have to click refresh. I think it just does it. And then it'll be called the bank app form. It'll show up typically over here under the federal side, and that's where you'd want to complete the bank app form, where you can select, if the customer is printing a check at your office, you can choose that there on the bank app form. Whether they're doing direct deposit, using any bank product related service, that's all managed through the bank app form. And again, I'm sorry, I can't demonstrate that, but it should be pretty straightforward. The most important piece is making sure that your software has a bank approval. And actually, while we're in the subject of that, it is a little bit early right now in the season, I believe. It's still too early for your software to have bank approval enabled. So if you try, I know that you may be approved with one of the banks, but already you may say it may say it's approved. But when you try to add a bank app form to your tax return, you'll have the same situation that I'm having, where it's not really adding anything. That's because approval hasn't been received to the software or hasn't been sent to your software just yet. That comes a little bit later on. Again, as you transmit with the software, you'll receive that approval. And if you ever want to see if you have bank product approval in your software, you can do that by going up to your database, going up to EF originators. This is what stores your your EFIN record, your EFIN information. And if you double click on your EFIN, there's a field here called Rack Bank. My field is currently blank. I imagine that's how your fields look like right now as well. Once you see the name of your bank pop in there, that's when your software has bank approval. From then on in, you can start adding bank products to your tax returns. And again, that just comes down as you transmit with the software. And normally towards the end of this month, towards the end of December is when you start receiving bank product approval sent to the program. Just as a little tip there. But returning into your tax return, we talked about the 8879, selecting that refund or how they're going to get their refund. We also have the option there for balance due if the taxpayer owes money. I'm going to change that back to a check since I don't have approval. And then related to this is, the tax preparation fees. We talked about how the customer is going to get their money, but as far as your tax office goes, that's all based off the invoice, right? Whatever shows up here as part of your tax preparation fees, that's what's going to be charged to the taxpayer. You can set up your software to have a billing configured already. It looks like mine is not configured. I don't have a billing. Well, you know what? Let's fix that. I can fix that real quick, hopefully. I'm going to go here to Setup, Office Setup. I have a billing, but it just hasn't been set up as the default. There you go. So under this General tab, I'm going to choose that my software is using this default billing. And then now that I've made that change, I can click on refresh here. It's not changing anything. It just shows the same stuff. But what I want to do is go to the return menu. If I go to return and then reload billing, this is what will kind of cause the invoice to refresh. That's the refresh button for the invoice, so to speak. And then whatever changes you make to the billing in the software, they'll be reflected in the return once you click on that reload billing. So another tip for you, if you make changes to the billing, but you're not seeing them reflected in the return, that's because you typically have to reload the billing since it was changed after the return was created. So there's our invoice. There's my $250 that's popping in as my default tax preparation fee, the one I configured into the software. You could also manually enter in tax prep, of course, tax prep fees. I can say an extra $100, let's say, and it'll add itself to the cost of the return. A lot of this is all managed under setup and billing setup. So if you're trying to set up your software to automatically, charge based off what forms are being used, you can go there to do that. But otherwise, you could also manually enter your fee for every return, whatever is best for your business, right? So that's the invoice. Now, what I wanted to do is we're kind of wrapping up the tax return at this point. If you've completed your client data, you've added the forms that you need to add, you've taken care of the refund and your tax preparation fees as well. Now it's just a matter of wrapping up this return. And a good way to do that is to verify the return. Verify the return to see if there's anything missing in this tax return, anything that you may have forgotten, something wrong with the return, whatever the case may be. So as you can see here, I clicked on verify, and it looks like I have a few things to fix here. So let's do that. I'm going to double click on the first one. It's going to take me to where I need to go to make the correction. And for this one, it just wants me to confirm that I'm going to sign the 8879. This is just one of those like confirmation errors or warnings that I kind of have to clear out. So yes, I'm going to sign the 8879, click on verify again. What else do I have to fix? This one, does the taxpayer receive and consent to receive and sign their documentation remotely? This is related to remote sign. If you're using remote sign, it's set up to ask this question. So if the customer wants to sign remotely, I can press yes there. If the customer does not want to sign remotely, I can just say no. In my case, I'll say yes just to kind of enable that functionality, just in case we want to show it off. We have this question having to do with with cryptocurrency. If they're using that or if they're, purchasing that. In my case, I'll just say no. This taxpayer is not using that. Here we have this direct deposit opt-out. This is interesting. This is like on the 1040, and it's popping up because it's telling you down here, I have bank account info present, but no direct deposit selected. So this is another one where the program is just trying to help you out. Let me go back to that one. I lost it. There it is. The software recognized that I have direct deposit information that I entered for this customer, but yet my 8879, I have a check that's being mailed to the customer. Why not, if I already have the direct deposit, just go ahead and make that a direct deposit from the IRS. That'll help process the return faster. And now if I click on verify, I don't have that error. Now, of course, this all depends on the taxpayer, whatever they want. If they want to get a check, sure. But that's what that error is all about, or that warning. And if that's the case, if they really want to get a check mailed to them, that little X that you saw there on the 1040, that's that opt-out X is just that, to tell the software that, never mind, we're not going to use direct deposit. Here, we're missing some information. This is the bottom of the 1040. We're missing our prepare information. This is my fault. I haven't configured the software to auto load who I am as a prepare. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to manually select that I'm this person. If you're experiencing something similar, where your prepare information is not loading automatically to the return, that's typically associated with your login. Your login does not. I'm using admin as an example. This is the problem. Prepare shortcut ID. I don't have anything in here, and that's why it's not entering my prepare information automatically. This can happen frequently with the admin login. You have to select who it is manually for admin. So now, if I select GB here, that's my prepare information. Now, moving forward, the program is always going to have prepare information loaded into the return. Okay? And now, oh my gosh, so many errors to fix, but not too bad. It's just, what else do we have here? I think this is due to the prepare information as well, not loading up. Let me select that. Signature date. Oh, no. I'm sorry. This has to do with the signature date. It's too early still to kind of really finish this return. I am working in tax year 22. So this is the last error that we're going to have to wait to fix. So we can't do anything there. But I can fix this 8867 stuff. So let's see what this is all about. This is all about filling out that form having to do with the credits. And the good thing about this is that the program, as you work with this, I'm just pressing enter in X to work my way through this. Naturally, you want to verify these questions with the taxpayer, make sure that they're all accurate. But for the sake of time, I'm just kind of going through these and showing how you can fill this out pretty quickly. And the same thing applies with, these last questions on the 8867. It takes you to this one here, letter I, and it took me to letter, I think, A for the other one. Naturally, these all depend on the taxpayer, right? What their situation is, but it's just taking you to one so you can fill it out as quickly as possible. And now we're at a pretty good spot. This is the last error that we can't, I think, clear out yet. But let me see something. If we click on print, I think this is disabled as well. Oh, no, we're good. We can take a look at how this process looks. So normally, once you're all done with errors, right, you verify there's no more errors left. I understand we still have this one, but this is just too early in the season for that one to get rid of. Then after that, you can start printing the returns. And when you click on the print option, I'll click on next to kind of skip that warning. it'll give you some options. You have plenty of other options of what you can do with this return, whether it's actually printing it out here with the print button, whether it's capturing that signature immediately with your signature pad, mouse, touchscreen. Those can all be captured right now. If you're using another option, let me go back into print here. If you're using remote sign, this is the one that, the customer is signing remotely. There's a charge associated with that would affect your wallet balance, but this is a good option. If the taxpayer is not in front of you, you can click on this. It'll start that process up of requesting a signature remotely. One of the things that may be confusing when you click on remote sign is this option here. It's asking in-office signature capture. In my case, if I want to use remote sign to capture the taxpayer's signature remotely, people tend to assume that you want to select it, but no, actually, this is if you want to capture the signature in office. If someone is signing in office, then you would select the box. I think this makes more sense when you have a joint return, when you have taxpayer and spouse, and let's say the taxpayer is at your office, but the spouse is not, or vice versa. Then in that case, you may want to capture the signature in office for one, but remotely for the other. You see what I mean? So if you leave it blank, here's in a nutshell. If you want to capture the taxpayer's signature remotely, leave the checkbox here blank. Whatever checkboxes here are blank, you click OK. That is when you're capturing their signature remotely. Okay? I understand it can be kind of confusing. You think you want to select it to do the remote signature, but it's actually the opposite. You're selecting it to capture the signature in office for that person. And then what other PDFs? You want to capture or create a PDF of the return? That option is here as well. And then assuming that you've set up your software for email, that option is here as well. If you want to send that email, you can do that. So let's capture, I'll just pretend that the taxpayer is right in front of me signing with mouse or touchscreen. There we go. Here, this is like the first time I've done this, so I'm going to allow that access. You may encounter that too. If you see those pop-ups appear as you're using the software, it just means that the program is trying to do something, access your browser, do something that requires Windows permission. So I recommend allowing that access just to avoid any issues. And there we go. Now we have this completed return, taxpayer signature, my signature, it's all good. If I close this PDF, I have my program configured to automatically archive things here in the document archive. There's my signed full tax return. So that your program should be set up that way as well by default. As a matter of fact, your prepare copy always is saved to the document archive. It's like a permanent setting. So you don't have to worry about missing your copy. It's always going to be in here, assuming that you're printing or capturing signatures, things like that. Well, I think we're good. At this point, we are really finishing up with this tax return. Last step, just EFile, right? That's when this Q button comes into play. This Q button is essentially getting the return ready to be e-filed, getting it ready to be transmitted. So I'm going to click on this next button here. There we go, Q return. If I had any states, they'd also be available here, right? And I can pick and choose what states I want to e-file or send them all. The important piece is that this little checkbox near selected, and then click on Q. And now, as you can see, the return closed automatically. Once I clicked on Q, it closes. The status of the return now reads return queued, meaning that it's waiting to be e-filed. And then you also have this little lock here that was placed, just indicating that the return was locked to prevent any further changes. This is supposed to be like the last version, the final version of the return. Now, if you need to make any changes, you can do that. You return up to this return menu, all the way up towards the top. And then here you have the ability to lock, unlock, return. It's like a toggle switch. So if you need to make any changes, you can open the return, unlock it. You may have to do an amendment or something. Or maybe the customer found an extra W-2. You could always come back here and unlock it. And then returning back to that, if the return was rejected or refused, if by chance you want to see that rejection message, some cases it depends, but sometimes those messages won't pop up immediately. Normally they do. Normally you open the return and any rejects are going to show up on screen. But if you want to make reference to them, if you want to see them again, you go to return rejects slash errors. This is like your collection. It's also like this rejects tab up top here. This is your collection of what happened with this return when it comes to any rejections. Okay, so let's close this return again. It's still queued, but it's still sitting here. It has not been e-filed just yet. It's waiting in my transmission queue. There's that one 1040 return waiting. And I could also click on filter down below to see that one customer. Now, if you'd like, I can deselect the customer, right? I can deselect them and then click on transmit. And then I'm doing what we call a blank transmission, colloquially. It's like just transmitting with the software to maybe pick up updates or pick up changes to statuses. But you're not transmitting, you're not e-filing the return just yet because I unselected it. I deselected it, or rather. But if I return back to my transmit, it's still there. It's always going to be here until it goes off or until you remove it. There's also a remove button here if you want to like really get rid of that tax return from the queue. The unselect is like a temporary thing. You're unselecting it for this one transmission that you're doing. But if you do want it to go, if you're ready to e-file, feel free to transmit the return. Even as early as, before the IRS begins accepting tax returns, you can transmit, you can send those returns to us if you want, and they'll be sitting here in our queue, basically, just waiting for the IRS to open their doors. So that is an option if you want. But might as well just leave them here in your system, especially if you have a customer that maybe wants to do a correction. That way you still have access to the return. You can still, prepare, make corrections. And then once tax season really begins, you can send them all off in one go. But either way, you're good. You can either send them early, send them when e-filing opens. They're going to be sent to the IRS whenever they open. And keep in mind that the return statuses, as you are looking at tax returns, the statuses will change with the tax returns. However, they won't change unless you transmit with the software. Again, the desktop program, it's offline by default. So it's only online when you transmit with the software. That's why transmitting with the program can be vital, not only for your updates, but also statuses, keeping track of what's going on with the return. Like if I never transmit here, the status is always going to it's always going to stay the same. When I transmit, that's when updates occur, not only for my software, but for the returns themselves. Well, I think that in essence is working with your basic tax return from beginning to end. Now, one thing I want to return to the tax return because I failed to mention that the process that we've seen so far when you're dealing with a tax return is called like the traditional forms-based method of working with a tax return. This is when you're adding forms manually, right? You're choosing what forms you want to add, double-click to add them into the tax return. Now, if you want a more guided experience, if you're maybe don't have much tax preparation experience, or you have a team member, a new tax preparer that's just getting started, and they feel overwhelmed, you have an interview process, an interview method of preparing a return that can be useful to you. This is all about preparing the return in a more step-by-step guided experience. Notice that when I click on this interview button, it hid all my general forms and options. It hid those. It hid my federal forms, and we're just focused on this more like step-by-step tax preparation method. And as you can see, it's very interesting, right? We have these pictures or icons to select what the taxpayer, what effects or what situation applies to the taxpayer. So if they're single, if they're married, if they have dependents, any situations that may apply to this return, you just pick and choose, what's going on with this taxpayer. And depending on the options that you select here, that'll help the software kind of like guide you through the process of preparing the return. So kind of let's see what that looks like. A lot of this has been filled out already, because I was already working with this return, but you can get an idea at least. So as you can see, here's the filing status, very step at a time. Here's the taxpayer's information, spouse's information, next, address information. All this is covered on the client data that we saw, the client data form or worksheet, but it's now much more like, just easier to understand, easier to obtain if you're new to tax prep. Do they have dependents? There, you can add the dependent right there. Here, this is popping in because I chose that they have other income. So what type of other income? 1099 miscellaneous, hit a household, or excuse me, household help, I should say. And look at this, all these types of income areas that popped in because I was processing the return this way. I selected that they have a 1099 and a 1099 miscellaneous, and they were household help. So it's just providing me that information very, very easily, all the way up to like filing the return, right? What the refund is going to be, what filing options that they're going to have, whether or not they're going to, mail it or e-file it or use a bank product. All that stuff is covered through this process. But, it's whatever you think would be best when it comes to processing the return. Do you want this more like manual add forms? Usually when you're trying to prepare the return as quickly as possible and you have experience, that's the most preferred method. But if you need a more guided experience, we also have that interview process as well. So either way, you're covered, depending on your comfort level. So I think now we're running over because I know that we covered a lot, but now I think we've done everything that we wanted to do. Let's go back into that PowerPoint and just wrap up here. Let's see a quick recap of what we covered today. We talked about the WIP, the work in progress summary, and all the different options and sections that are in there to help you process the return. We talked about preparing a basic tax return, what that process looks like, when it comes to filling out the information on the client data, adding forms manually with add a form, using the invoice to enter in your tax preparation fees, some of the tools that you have available like remote sign, SignDoc to capture signatures immediately, the document archive. Those are all things that are built into the software that you can start using right away. We even briefly talked about TaxPass, taxpassapp.com. That's a new website that you can use to kind of connect the software with a mobile application, this mobile website. If you need some help or guidance about that, let us know. And then finally, verification and transmit. Those last few steps when it comes to dealing with the return, verifying for errors, and then also doing a transmission of that return, what that looks like. So with that said, I don't think there's anything else other than to say, thank you for your time, for keeping with me for a bit longer than expected. We do have another training webinar scheduled for this week as well, especially useful if you're talking about CrossLink Online. Even if you want to get a look at it, if you're using desktop and you want to just see what the online program is like, definitely recommend taking a look at it, whether it's live or through our YouTube channel. It'll be posted there as well.